The alien judge pointed at the sleeping child and said, "Balance demands one life." 8 minutes left until the reactor cracked the ring city like an egg. Captain Ahn unlatched her collar seal, pressed her forehead to the glass of the stasis crib, and said, "Then count me with her. Make your arithmetic bleed." They called it the conservation chamber, but it looked like a chapel stripped for parts. Cables looped like torn garlands, coolant fog smeared the floor, and the arbiters stood in a polished crescent that reflected everyone else but never themselves. At the center, a white foam crib holding a small body, respirator pedaling at a slow, stubborn rhythm, the sound of a paper fan against summer heat. "Nori," the medtech whispered, as if saying the name too loudly might trigger an emergency subroutine that would erase it. Judge Kull spoke through the ring's grammar engine in a tone too calm for the red countdown burning along the lintel. "Mass over threshold by 41.2 kilograms. Predicted fracture at T-752. Edict 14 prescribes a single vented body. Random selection enacted. The algorithm chose the stowaway. Random." Ahn said. "You trawled every berth and landed on a kid. Your species renamed lottery's fate long before we arrived," Kull said. Nori's eyelashes quivered at the word kid as if it were a tug on a dream. Ahn remembered a different child, a different chamber, a rescue that arrived 3 minutes late. She filed that memory where she kept knives, sharp enough to cut the present clean. The ceiling thrummed in a pitch that made bone feel like glass. Somewhere above, millions walked markets, hunched over tea, pointed at murals of the first jump. None of them heard the reactor's high, brittle note. "Propose an alternative," Kull offered, ritual courtesy at the lip of a cliff. Ahn stepped into the cone of surgical light. "Distribute harm. We microshed across a volunteer cohort. Heat bleed, marrow latency, sleep dead, dermal cryo 41 kilograms in aggregate without killing anyone. Prohibited," an arbiter said. "Partiality masquerading as mercy. No preferential harm." "It's not preference, it's consent," Ahn shot back. "There is a moral difference between taking and being asked." The medtech cleared her throat. "Captain, the microabsorption mesh is hot-patched to life support. If we get authorization." "We won't," Kull said. "We can recruit volunteers via market feeds," the tech finished anyway. 30 seconds to read, thumbprint, dose. "We need 900 to start. A tiny cooling burn. Mild anemia for a day. Vivid dreams maybe. No fatalities. We tested on me." She lifted her sleeve. The square of skin was pale as moon glass, hairless as a healed story. Ahn watched Kull watch the medtech. The judge was not indifferent, he was disciplined. "There's a difference." She aimed there. "You call your algorithm random," she said. "I call it lazy. It refuses to see faces because faces make us answer for what we do. Look." She switched the public lens to the crib's microcam. The city saw eyelashes, the smudge of a drawing on the child's wrist, stars stitched in clumsy dots. Ahn didn't add commentary. The image did the speaking humans were built for. Kull's surface troubled, as though a memory passed beneath it. "We are not monsters, Captain. Then don't do monster math, AHN said. She unclamped her collar and laid her throat bare to the chamber's sterile air. Render the equation with all its terms. She set her palm on the crib's lid. If you vent Nori, you vent me. Link our biometrics. Any action that ends one ends both. The arbiters rippled, a shiver in glass. You introduce bias, Cole said. I introduce accountability. AHN looked up at the public lens, at the unblinking city. If we're going to be a people under these laws, let us be people who choose. Nori stirred, the respirator pedaled, and the name Nori, spoken softly again, warmed the room by an immeasurable, undeniable degree. They recited the edicts quickly, like technicians reading scripture with a fire at their heels. Edict 1, waste not. 2, the system survives. 3, no preferential harm. 14, when mass exceeds safe tolerance and no inanimate load can be ejected, one living body shall be vented. The arbiters did not bow. Religion wasn't the point. Predictability was. They had watched empires drown in exceptions. They wore glass to remind themselves what happens when heat meets form without rules. AHN had studied the edicts during probation year, learned where they flexed and where they cut. The arbiters believed pity, when scaled, calcified into corruption. They had seen engineers fudge tolerances because someone was someone's brother. They wrote law to be colder than any particular tier. But consent changes the moral algebra, AHN said nautical. If 1,000 say take a gram of me, that's not the same as taking a child who cannot choose. You smuggle sentiment with vocabulary, Cole replied. A gram of risk is not weightless. Neither is a life. Cole's surface dimmed by a measure. I was present at the RAL collapse, he said. 17 million. We spared a single child and accumulated 1,000 small advantages for the privileged. By the century's end, we incinerated 10 times that number. Our law protects you from us and from yourselves. Your law protects you from guilt, AHN said. Different thing. The medtech's hands didn't stop. Captain, feeds are ready. If the arbiters sign, consent packets will bloom across every stall and shuttle HUD. Cole listened as counsel flooded his private channel. AHN couldn't hear the words, but she could read the posture, fear of markets turning grief into spectacle, fear of the wealthy renting out the pain of the poor, fear that a clean right would become a messy negotiation with a billion small hearts. If we allow fractional harms, the rich will purchase endurance, one arbiter murmured. If we allow spectacle, justice becomes theater, said another. Justice is already theater, AHN said aloud. You just prefer a minimalist set. She switched the feed, Nori's wrist, close up. Ink constellations. A star drawn with too many points, a comet smeared into a bruise of graphite. The city's sound changed, not crying, not yet, but the intake of a collective breath that cities take when a choice finally has a face. Cole touched the cradle rim. The gesture read as tenderness until you remembered it was part of the rite. Captain AHN, he said after a stretch of silence that soaked the room, if I authorize consent distribution and the mesh fails, the record will show that I allowed a child to die after permitting theater. The record will show you tried to make law worthy of the people it governs, AHN said. And if it succeeds, the edicts will learn a new verb. Which verb? Kul asked, almost curious. Together. He looked at her as if seeing, for the first time, that humans kept trick boxes in their chests and called them hearts, and that those boxes sometimes contained tools sharper than knives. He lifted his hand. The Medtecha's console chimed authorization granted. Consents bloomed like algae under sunlight. Do the work, Kul said. And know that for every word we add, something else will bend. Everything bends, AHN said. The question is whether it breaks. Above them, the reactor sang a higher, thinner note. Time put on a thinner coat. Consent cascaded like rain once you let it. Market feeds pulsed green, a grandmother at a noodle stall, a scrap tech with grease under his nails, a dancer stretching against a pillar, a pilgrim palming a bead that had crossed 3-star chains, a bored child putting down a game long enough to press a thumb that would make her dizzy at bedtime. 900 became 1200 became 4000. People are braver when you ask them instead of ordering them. People are braver still when they can see the face they're sharing the weight with. The Medtecha's team printed mesh patches from a humming suitcase-sized box that smelled like warmed rain. Volunteers arrived in waves, sleeves rolled. The mesh kissed. Cold sank into marrow. For a second, each volunteer stood on the skin of a frozen lake and heard the dark sing. Then warmth returned, a deliberate tide. A few winced. More smiled, the tight, private smile of someone whose pain finally meant something. Side effects? AHN asked. Strange dreams, the Medtech said. Poets call them better ones. Arbiters stood like sculptures with pulse. Council hissed into Kul's ear. If we allow fractional harms, elites will rent resilience, one warned. If consent is gamified, we create markets in suffering, another argued. If we go soft now, stochastic tragedies will multiply. Or we stop hiding the cost in one absence, AHN said. Show me a society that can carry a child's body to the airlock and not ruin itself quietly in the aftermath. Kul said nothing. His surface held an image now, faint but present, a hand drawn in lines of light, awkward, earnest. He regarded the ink on Nori's wrist as if it were a legal brief from a species the edicts had not learned to read. The reactor crooned. The Medtech flinched. Captain, the heat vector isn't curving like Sim. The mesh is absorbing, but the plasma's mood is volatile. Plasma doesn't have moods, an arbiter objected. You've never been in love, the Medtech said without looking up. AHN felt the downward tug of time. She remembered the other chamber, the crisp click of a lever, the silence that took years to interrupt with laughter. She would not repeat the ritual. If the law was a machine, she would jam it with something the machine could not swallow without changing shape. Play the city, she said. What? The Medtech blinked. Sound, AHN said. Rhythm. We phase the mesh absorption with beats instead of a flat draw. Give the plasma a pattern to chew. Engineers call it resonance control. Musicians call it groove. That's not engineering, an arbiter sneered. It's music, AHN said. Same bones. Kul's council howled. He lifted a hand and quieted them. His gaze held On's, not hostile now, not resigned, something like the precise attention a surgeon saves for the cut that decides a life. You want to turn a city into an instrument, he said. It already is, Ahn said. It's just playing fear. Let's retune. He considered the clock, the child, the law. Do it? The medtech grinned the way you do when you're terrified and finally allowed to be brilliant. She mapped market clatter, shuttle pings, crowd foot, stall chime into a grid. Ahn timed the mesh, 4 beats draw, 2 hold, 1 glide, a hush. The volunteers listened with their skin. The ring listened with its lights. Begin, Ahn said, and the city lifted its hands. At first the city drummed like a chorus of dropped spoons. Pans thudded, children clapped offbeat, shuttle pilots tapped thrusters in jittery sync. The medtech's grid hiccuped, corrected, stretched the rhythm around a heat curve like a seasoned teacher guiding a choir across a hard interval. The mesh shimmered on 1,000 arms, chests, throats. People swayed without meaning to. The ring's lights dimmed, brightened, held. 4 beats draw, 2 hold, glide, hush. Again. Again. Nori stirred. Tiny fingers curled. The respirator kept its pedal rhythm and somehow found impossibly a harmony. On the feed, comments slid from panic to prayer to jokes to recipes to lullabies. Humans make rope out of any thread when the drop yawns below. Absorption rising, the medtech said. Temperature falling. We're buying minutes. Minutes are lives, Ahn said. She reached for the glass. Cole matched her, palm to palm with the lid between, like 2 sides of an equation finally acknowledging that the equal sign had been lying by omission. The arbiters watched a law they had carved into stone grow moss. Some recoiled. Some leaned in. Cole did neither. He listened. His surface showed more of the clumsy constellations now, as if his body had decided it could host a child's mistakes without cracking. If this works, he said, we will owe a revision. If this works, Ahn said, you will owe an apology. To whom? Cole asked. To future children who won't have to learn your rights. The reactor screamed. The pitch shot past choral, past metaphor, and the floor took a long, liquid step sideways. Alarms wrote red across every surface. Containment slip, the medtech shouted. Pattern lost. Hold the beat. Ahn called, but panic is a better drummer than discipline. The city staggered. The mesh flickered. Heat rose like a hand you could feel closing around your throat. Cole did something no one expected. He began to sing. It wasn't beautiful. His species didn't do pitch like humans. But the note he chose welded itself to the reactor's howl and dragged it half a register lower. Arbiters turned, astonished. Cole kept singing, voice like glass cooling on a riverbank, a slow blue sound you feel in teeth. Ahn picked up the line. The medtech mapped it. The city clung to it. Market pans found the downbeat. Shuttle taps fell into step. The beat returned, ragged but honest. The slip slowed. The scream thinned to a whine. Numbers obeyed. Threshold crossed, the medtech whispered. 41 kilograms. We're under. Silence arrived with weight. The respirator petted the air. The cradle fogged where On's breath metcals through the lid. Someone laughed and sobbed at the same time on the public feed. Thousands echoed them without coordination and achieved a better choir. Cole lowered his hand. We will revise, he said, voice hoarse. Consent shall be admissible. Fractional harms shall be regulated, not forbidden. The edicts will learn together. AHN nodded. And the random. Cole regarded the sleeping child and the badly drawn stars. We will teach the algorithm to see faces. We will make it look until it understands. Outside, the ring city exhaled, a long, human sound. Inside the chamber, 2 hands, 1 human, 1 alien stayed on the glass until it warmed. The city slept like a patient coming off anesthesia, shallow breaths, twitching dreams, a stubborn will to wake. In the morning market, steam rose from broth like thin ghosts deciding whether to linger. Volunteers compared patches the way veterans compare scars. Some joked about the dream's blue corridors, starflowers, a voice like cooling glass humming a lullaby. A few felt sick and hid it behind tired smiles. AHN walked the aisles with her collar ressaled, leaving her name off vendor slates and her hands visible. You did right, a grandmother said, tapping her own mesh square. We are not afraid of ache. You made a show, a miner snapped, shaking a chipped cup. You turned fear into a concert. Both were true. Truths often disagree without either being a lie. In the arbiter cloister, counsel unfurled in cold ribbons. Some demanded sanction. Some argued for medals. Neither tempted Cole. He stood at a wall that wasn't one and watched old precedents scroll like fish skeletons. On one pane the raw collapse replayed in silent, chronological cruelty. On another, yesterday's chamber played with sound. Cole paused it where his voice joined the reactor's scream and almost laughed at the honesty of his own surprise. He drafted language because that was how his people knelt. Amendment to Edict 14, when mass exceeds safe tolerance and inanimate load cannot be ejected, distributed voluntary mitigation shall be considered prior to lottery. No consent shall be valid without plain language notice, time-stamped assent, and option to revoke. Harms must be capped, audited, equitably spread. He added a clause and deleted it, then added it again. Algorithms must see persons. Before enacting any lethal selection, a quorum of witnesses shall view the selected life in real time. Law must look before it cuts. Witness quorum, an arbiter said. You invite theater. Reality is theatrical when it matters, Cole answered. We have been pretending otherwise. He sent the draft to AHN with notes the length of breaths. She read leaning against a pillar under a mural of the first jump. Consent under pressure, she annotated. Make a fail-safe, no volunteer can consent more than X times within Y days. And build a floor, leadership must be within the first 10 to opt in, or the system will only ever eat the generous poor. Leadership. Cole returned. A category your species loves to pretend is self-explanatory. Start with me, AHN typed. Write it in, captains first. He wrote it. The penalty for refusal would not be legal but reputational, which in a city like this could be heavier than exile. He did not say thank you. The draft said it for him. Nori woke at noon to a chorus of quiet relief. Her first word was a question why. But it wasn't the grand kind. She meant the drawing on her wrist. Why did I make the stars wrong? Her voice rasped like a match struck too many times. They're not wrong, the medtech said. They're yours. My mom says you have to earn stars, Nori said, serious as dead. She held her arm up to the lens as if the city were a teacher who graded in light. Can I fix them later? Later is long, AHN said, and it felt like a contract. Message storms hit the feeds, praise, rage, sermons, jokes. A poem became popular that ended with, "We will teach the algorithm to blush." A black market clinic tried to sell mesh patches with carved hearts, regulators shut it by dusk. A pundit called AHN a tyranny of tears, a scientist called her a necessary error margin. The market went back to haggling. People are adept at stitching normalcy over a wound while it heals underneath. At twilight, AHN and Cole met in the conservation chamber with the machines sleeping like beasts after a hunt. You bound yourself to the child's fate, Cole said. Some call that coercive. I made sure the knife would cut me, too, AHN said. Coercion starts when only others bleed. And if your death would have doomed more? Cole asked. Then I would have died with the law I refused to obey. That's the bill. He nodded. Your species pays in symbols and insists the currency is real. Sometimes it is, AHN said, and thought of music that tamed a scream. Cole sent the draft upward. AHN sent a list downward, names of volunteers who had fainted after their second dose, recommendations for pacing, a note about a girl who dreamed of cold rivers and woke wanting to learn to sing. We need stewards for the dreams, she wrote. If we open people to each other, we owe them a way to carry what they let in. Cole added a final line. After any distributed mitigation, the city shall fund care of consequence, sleep clinics, calm rooms, shared debrief. If we burden many, we must learn to soothe many. He signed it with the mark of his office and the awkward constellation on his skin, copied there in faint light. He did not ask permission for the last flourish. He called it a precedent in the only court that mattered, his own. They called it a review, not a trial, because trials required charges and the city hadn't decided whether courage could be criminal. The chamber of weights opened like a flower made of laws, petals of precedent, a pistil of protocol, the smell of sterilized intent. A public lens floated in the air like an unblinking pupil. Crowd sound pressed against the glass from outside, the restless tide of voices that makes a polity a person. Arbiter Reith presented the case with practiced patience. Captain AHN introduced bias by linking her life to the selected subject, creating an impermissible dependency. She induced consent under duress by televising a child's face. She converted justice into theater. AHN resisted the urge to bow. I made the audience visible, she said. You have always had theater. You just kept the audience off stage and called it objectivity. Objectivity keeps rulers from favoring their own, Reith said. And anonymity keeps rulers from feeling what they rule, AHN replied. Cole took the stand last, as custom required. He gave the custom its due and then cheated in a human direction by speaking as if to a single person. We designed the edicts for empire-scale entropy, he said. They did not anticipate a species that turns harm into music on a weekday. If law cannot welcome unforeseen virtue, it will punish it. That is a failure mode known to history. Retha's mouth made a flat line that in his species meant both I concede your style and I reject your conclusion. And the coercion. The captain shortened the knife, Cole said. She made it cut her as well. That is not coercion. It is covenant. The medtech testified with graphs and a voice that trembled only when she mentioned Nori's unsteady eyelashes. A philosopher from Dockside argued that consent in a storm can be real if the offer is clear and revocable. A union rep demanded a hard cap so no district becomes an invisible battery. A poet recited 2 lines and sat down, we kept our promise to the plasma/we will keep it to each other. Then Nori, feet in hospital socks, came to the circle because someone invited her and she said yes. Her voice was small but not timid. You can use my stars if you want, she told the arbiters. You can make them better. But don't take them away from me. Reith leaned forward, as if a child's grammar required closer listening. Why do you want to keep them? So I know what I fixed later, Nori said, as if obvious things shouldn't have to be said twice. The room did something no room designed for law expects, it laughed. Not at her. With relief. With gratitude that language still had simple bridges left. Cole watched the sound land and thought, faces first. He entered it as a line item in his head. Judgment took an hour and a century. The panel returned with a rope of words. Captain AHN is censured for procedural breach, Reith read. Censure carries no fine, no exile, only a mark that says, you did not follow us, and we had to follow you. The together clause is adopted provisionally for 1 cycle with audits, caps, witness quorum, and leader first provisions. The algorithm will see faces. AHN accepted the censure like a tattoo she had expected. She looked at the mark hovering on her record, an elegant symbol that meant bruise you chose. It suited her. Outside, the city's tide rose into cheers and arguments, which are cousins. Inside, Cole turned his palm outward in the arbiter sign for I will be responsible for the next consequence this causes. Next. AHN said, half smiling. Laws breed consequences the way humans breed stories, Cole said. We should be present at the natal ward. He did not anticipate how quickly the ward would call. It found them not as a crisis finds heroes in a stage play, but as work finds workers in the middle of a shift. An ore barge from the inner rocks hit a gravity ripple and came up 30 kilos over the safe window. The captain's voice came thin over calm, we've jettisoned scrap, we're at hard floor, we're 3 minutes from microfracture. No city beneath to drum. No time to route 900 volunteers through market stalls. Just a tired crew, a lovely algorithm that now paused to show a deckhand's face before it killed him, and a roomful of people who had promised to be consistent. AHN stood so fast her chair scuffed a bruise on the floor. Open the Together network, she said. Global, then off-world. We don't need the city. We need people. The caps the medtech warned. Apply them. Leader first, AHN said, and pressed her thumb to volunteer. Her patch drank cold. Cul, with the barest of theatrical sighs, pressed his palm too. Arbiters followed, some because they meant it, some because reputation is a stern tutor. A slider lit up on the feed as other rings, other stations, other ships blinked green. A monk in vacuum robes. A teenager on a freighter who should have been sleeping. A botanist up to her elbows in hydrogels. The mesh printed faster than fear could. The new algorithm did the thing Cul had feared and hoped, it asked to see. Before it would select a body, it demanded a quorum of eyes on the candidate's face, demanded a minute of attention that felt like a year. The deckhand's name was Pal. He had a chipped tooth and a superstition about touching bulkheads with his left hand first. He had laughed on 5 continents and never cried in public. He approved the broadcast, jaw-tight, because people are surprising when you ask them to be seen. We're live across 4 systems, the medtech whispered. Beat ready. Play the memory, AHN said. The city's old rhythm unrolled like a rope thrown to a drowning swimmer. But memory is a fragile bridge. The timing wobbled. Remote volunteers weren't hearing the same echo. We need a conductor, Cul said, and then realized the word he meant was choirmaster, which tasted stranger in his mouth. AHN centered her breath and counted into the comms, 4 draw, 2 hold, glide, hush. Her voice threaded the static like a needle with no time for elegance. The barge's captain followed. The deckhand grinned a scared grin and slapped the bulkhead with his left hand, out of habit, then obeyed the beat he had never practiced. The mesh sang on a million skins in mismatched harmony. The ore barge's temperature curve reached a lip and hesitated. A volunteer in Dock 10 collapsed. Underlying anemia no intake form had caught. The medtech swore and cut her feed. Caps are mercies with teeth. AHN took another patch and felt the cold stone of doubt slide into her gut. What if the law they had softened became a pillow over someone's mouth? Hold, Cul said, the word wide enough to hold her to. They held. The curve bent. The barge's scream softened to a whine. 30 kilos became 20, then 10, then numbers that tasted like survival. We're under, the barge captain said in a voice that remembered how to breathe. Pal slid down a wall sobbing into his hands. The quorum watching him did not look away. Attention, at scale, is hot. After, the feed filled with the wrong kind of celebration. Merchants tried to sell one-click heroism. Someone coded a plug-in to make your patch glow brighter on camera. AHN sent takedown notices with the etiquette of a diplomat and the speed of a bouncer. Cul drafted a footnote to the together clause, no gamification of consent. No badges, no leaderboards, no monetization. Generosity shall not be mined. The volunteer who fainted woke in a clinic with juice and salt on her tongue. She asked if she had helped, and when the answer was yes, she cried in the polite way of citizens whose tears are rationed. AHN sat with her until the color came back into her fingers. We need better screens, the medtech murmured. And better songs. Write them, AHN said. Both. Cul watched the network settle into a new kind of silence, the good kind, after a scream. He traced the algorithm's face-seeing protocol and thought about what seeing changed. We care differently when we look, we lie less when we are seen. He added another clause to the clause, the way a mason adds a brace after the first winter. Witnessing shall be dignified, no zooms, no edits, no mockery. The world must earn the right to look. They carved the amendments not into stone but into habits. A ceremony would come later, because people and arbiters both need costumes sometimes. For now, updated boards at airlocks, new prompts in the consent app, extra cots in the sleep clinics, quiet rooms with warm light where volunteers could trade dreams like recipes. A chorus met twice a week to keep the beat sharp, and a math teacher turned the rhythm into fractions until a class of 8-year-olds could clap the reactor safe with a competence that made adults misty. The algorithm did what it had been told and more. Faced with faces, it learned to ask better questions. It flagged when consent clustered in poorer districts and paused until leadership numbers rose. It filtered out bots trying to flood the quorum with synthetic pity. It insisted on simple words. It began every selection with a line that felt like respect. This is Pal. This is Nori. This is who we are asking you to know. Cole visited the mural of the first jump and laughed at its arrogance, ships leaping alone into a darkness they imagined was empty. We thought the void was the threat, he told AHN. It was the math we wrote inside it. Math isn't the enemy, AHN said. It's the grammar. We're just adding tenses. Future imperfect, Cole said, pleased with himself. She didn't give him the smile he wanted but the one he had earned. We'll make it sing. Nori, discharged with a clean bill and a list of foods that would taste too bright for a week, came to the chamber with a new marker. She drew over the old constellation without erasing it, thickening some points, leaving others messy on purpose. You said later is long, she told AHN, but I want to start. What's it called? AHN asked. The Together, Nori said. Because it's not just one star. The name stuck. Names are algorithms too. News flows tried to crown AHN. She refused the halo politely by handing it to every volunteer who would take a patch and every arbiter who would take a clause. Don't center me, she said on a feed that reached 8 systems. Center the work. Hollow portraits of her face faded a degree, which was the right temperature. A tribunal tried to restore the old lottery in a frontier station after a power broker complained that the new consent cap slowed commerce. The vote failed by a margin narrow enough to salt. Cole sent a private message that contained no triumph, only I was afraid of this. AHN replied with a map of training choirs spreading like nervous systems across the charts. We'll outrun them with readiness, she wrote. At sunset on Adoption Day, they held the ceremony after all. The chamber filled with people wearing their ordinary clothes because no costume fit. Cole read the amended Edict 14 aloud. Citizens hummed the beat under the words and did not clap, because reverence sometimes sounds like a held breath. AHN stood next to him, neither above nor below, and placed her palm on the glass. He matched it. The glass warmed faster than it had the first time. Practice matters. Balance demands one life, the old line had said. Balance demands we look together first, the new one added. Balance accepts that numbers without faces are not complete, Cole said, voice steady. Balance can be taught to keep mercy, AHN finished, and the grammar engine did not object. They let the silence be heavy again, this time by design. Then the city exhaled not a cheer, just the sound a place makes when it knows what to do next. Later, alone in the corridor, AHN stopped under a maintenance light and spoke to the empty air as if it were a child listening from behind a door. We'll fail again, she said. We'll fix it again. She touched the censure mark on her record and smiled as if at an old scar. It had become a guide, the way a wrong star keeps you honest. Cole approached with the soft footfalls of someone who has decided to learn a new step. We have other edicts that ache, he said. Would you? Yes, AHN said, before he finished. She didn't ask which ache. She would meet them in order, with rhythm. They walked together toward the work. The corridor lights pulsed in an unintentional tempo. Somewhere, kids practiced a pattern on tabletops, missionaries of a future in which arithmetic did not have to be cruel to be exact. The reactor was very quiet. It had been taught a new song and liked it.